Great.
Alrighty. Hi, it's John here, and I've got another creative entrepreneur's journey, this time with Beatrice Bowles, who's not only a children's author, but recently she's a new voting member of the Grammy. And before we get into that and how she got into it, Beatrice, maybe you can show a little bit about like how you got into, how did you become an author? Like, what is it that like kind of got you started? We talked a little bit before the show, but maybe you can share some of your story with the folks in the audience.
I never imagined I could really be an author. I love to read so much, and I've read so many good books that I thought, oh, it's just too hard to be as good as they are. And meanwhile, I was reading stories to myself, later to my children, then to children in public schools, and I saw children just love stories. But I didn't really have a story to tell. I didn't think I did. And then after my grandmother died, and she had been my best friend. She sent me books every week, whether it was about dancing, which I still love, or dogs and horses, which all girls love, or fairy tales. I just loved her packages of books. And she had the same name as me, Beatrice Bowles, so that was like super special. So after she died, in her jewelry box was this ring. They all went, ew, that's disgusting. Maybe her husband won it in a poker game. And it was covered with Egyptian symbols like pyramid and an obelisk and hieroglyphs and a feather and the symbols. And so I said, I think that's cool. I like it. So they, oh, take that thing. And then as I went on, I thought, well, I love the world of storytelling and world mythology, and I was recording all these things. One was Heaven's a Garden in the Heart, which is all about different cultures' stories of heaven. The next one was all about resilient kids who faced bullies, called Spark Catchers. And then I did a book of stories about spiders, because in so many cultures that last a long time, spiders are something that teach people the secrets of survival. Like you can be really little, but if you're clever, you'll survive. So anyway, nice. all this kind of roamed around in my head. And then I went back to school because my kids were grown up and they were having kids, and we all love to read, and they always had loved fairy tales, and their kids love fairy tales. I thought, I don't know what to do, but I'll go back to school because I love school. I got an MFA in writing, and with an emphasis on writing for children. And at that point, I'd done a number of recordings with a woman, musician in Louisville, and the program I chose was in Louisville, so we could keep performing and recording. And I met her because I went to a school there. I think it was a big Halloween party. I remember there was a bonfire, and I was dancing around dressed as Spider-Woman, this old kind of like Hopi goddess. And she came up to me and said, I'd like to make music for your stories. And I said, great. And so now we're on our 4th CD. Now we have 4. And those 4 are what enabled me to become a Grammys member. Okay, so back to writing. All the stories take a lot of writing. I find them in academic volumes, research volumes, ancient texts, and I retell them so that kids today will understand the language and the action. Because sometimes it's very, archaic, like your grandmother might have a way of understanding it that you wouldn't really have the meaning. So I would say basically I simplify them in writing. So finally, after 4 times of doing that, I said, maybe I have a story. And in graduate school, even though I had to do a lot of academic writing, like report on what were the great books for children, I began to write this story about the ring, and that it had a special purpose, and the grandmother had a gang and a bunch of girls that helped her in this project to try to do something to stop religious violence in the world. And there were these kind of wild explorers, these girls, when their parents didn't know it, they were roaming around Paris, going to all the churches and all the temples and mosques and cemeteries, trying to figure out what was all this stuff about spirituality. And then when they witnessed a firebombing of a mosque, they thought, now how can you tell people to be good and kind and loving and try to kill them or blow something up? So that's kind of the story behind my story. So then I tried to put everything I know about, the symbols on the ring and what this little girl was like. If I'd been a really brave little girl, I would have done what these girls do. I was curious You remember that? What were you curious about when you were little?
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is like bring back that curiosity and nurturing it again is one of the things that we lose, and yet, yeah, it's so important though to kind of remember what it was like to have the curiosity of a child.
It's so important. And I think that's where kids get the courage to not go numb and not start drugs or not get stuck in them. Because if you're curious and you think it's all a big adventure and it's kind of up to me to encounter it, you know, no one can give it to you with money or even friendships. You have to get your adventure. You have to find your soul. So it's really fun telling kids stories about that. So then I thought, well, now I have to write one, or I want to write one. And this is a shy girl. She doesn't have very many friends because she's very young looking for her age and imaginative. So I had to, you know, learn nothing's harder for me than this thing I've been doing, which is to write a novel. And because I'm critical, you know, I've read so many good stories. I've read so many good books. It has to be good. And I still don't have it published. But I'm working on it. I join organizations. I keep doing the storytelling because it expands my reach and my confidence and gives me the courage to keep going. That's what it is, a quest.
What was it that drew you to children's stories first though? Like what, like, you know, some people just dive right into like novels or something that like they, you know, like kind of as an adult maybe connect with this stuff. But it's interesting to kind of that you chose the children's route though and stuff. So what was it that kind of drew you toward that?
I think it's because I never outgrew my passion for fairy tales. I like, you know, Gone with the Wind and James Bond and Jane Austen and Charles Dickens. I love them. But there was something about fairy tales that just got me, just deep, deep, deep in my soul. And I think it's the sense of adventure and that there are these laws of kindness. Like there's a lot of fiction today is about cruelty. And fairy tales have lots of cruelty. But the cruel person is always found out in the end. And the kind and little person often survives. I think I identified with those young creatures that people or animals that had to face a very tough world. And I never stopped loving them. The next thing was my kids were so much fun to read to. It's almost as if I could never stop reading to them every night. You know, they're sitting there with a child on each side, reading a book to them. I could just feel they were feeling what I felt when I was little. And I thought, you know, there's so many kids in public schools whose parents work so hard, they're too tired to read to them. And that gave me the idea for the CDs. If you're tired at work or your English isn't what you want it to be and your kids want to hear stories, put these on. And there's music with them. And that was a huge thing for me. I never had music with them, obviously, in my storytelling childhood. But with the music, it just seemed like for any child distracted by the world or needing a little more surrounding because they're used to TV and bombarded with all that. The music, Sarah is a genius, this woman, when you hear her music. So she kind of wraps the story in this setting. It's not like music that takes over, but it's always supporting the story. And so I think it's that combination. They're great in the car when most kids are like with their hand held and like that, you know, they'll actually listen. And then when they get to the end, they'll say, play it again. And so the parents are happy that they have something they love to listen to. But it's the fairy tale energy, I think, that is the core to your answer to your question. What did you like when you were little?
I would say, yeah, it was definitely stories that really had like, you know, just that adventure, like you said, and that there was a hero that they triumphed. So absolutely, those are definitely the things that like, and I think just, you know, I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell's work, and where they're like the hero's journey is like kind of, I for me, like I really resonate with that for just not only for these different stories, but also for the entrepreneur's journey. I also see that like there's such a huge parallel, you know, like probably for yourself as an artist that you've seen where you kind of face these challenges and then you had to overcome them. And ultimately, you know, there's this kind of like, you know, even if it's a metaphorical death, but it's a death of the old self that then, you know, for you to be born as this new artist and stuff, I definitely like kind of, for me, like that's the power of like kind of where his, you know, isn't just a myth that's something to be put on the shelf, but it's something that we really take on in our daily lives. So that's for me, like kind of what I share as a message for creative entrepreneurs. So
what a great message, because he was all about making it present. The story meant something, and you had to claim the meaning for yourself. We sent the manuscript of my first recording. Isn't any of the ones I showed you. It's with New Dimensions Radio, which is a PBS affiliate here, and they produce all the New Age interviews that go on. They're kind of like the top. So I had been, like you, a worshiper, a follower of Joseph Campbell, and they were doing they are the people that did all his interviews. So he was huge in the sky. So I had this day, I was reading to my kids one night, and we had a book of native California stories. And the story I found was about how the world was created. Now, we were not a very religious family, but the only story I knew about the creation of the world was the Bible. And it never made a lot of sense to me, 6 days and the rib and the wisdom was bad. And I don't know, I wasn't very good at that story. It didn't pull me in. And I thought, wait a minute, if there's another creation story here, these Native Americans who had no contact with Europe or the Middle East or anyone else, they had their story. I went on this rampage of learning. I looked up every creation story I could find. And of course, it was the 70s when the scholarship was finally translating all these classic stories of the world into English. So I got Indian, African, Alaskan, Chinese, Japanese, European, ancient, all of them. And I just had a field day, and I thought, no, wait a minute. Joseph Campbell, he's here. I've got to try this. So I proposed to New Dimensions that for children, for me, it would have been so great. Any child, I think, tell them the stories from different cultures about how the world was created, and we will eliminate this whole stupid religious battle business about who owns the truth. I was a little naive. Nonetheless, he couldn't have been kinder. The radio station said, yes, we'll do it. And we would send the manuscript back and forth from here and Hawaii, where he was living. He was much older then. And he was so gracious and so charming. And his basic message was just what you're saying. Look for the similarities. Look for what ties these stories together. And there was a Tahitian one about the god spinning out of an empty shell and giving up his whole body to form the sky. And there was a Norse one about a goddess of air whose daughter was a teenage rebel who went to Earth and became mother of water. And then they argued and had a storm and she got pregnant. I thought, if people knew that these ancient, fabulous stories were there, a child could grow up with an open mind and say, well, I like this one, my family has this one, but those are good too. And learn from them these amazing principles of creativity, that it all comes from within you. And there are going to be hard times and storms and fights and all that. But in the end, the creation is essentially so good, and that nature is essentially such a lovely miracle. So, I mean, I talk too much, but I think it's because I love what I do. And it's like you, I've so often thought, well, I'm not selling very many of these things. Well, I'll keep going. And then every time I keep going, something more happens. By the way, I recommend it to you because she's been so good for me. A young woman I know through Tango here called Lauren Lee Anderson. She has a new company called Moonshot, and she's really been helping me because I have a lot of followers on Facebook and on Twitter some, and LinkedIn some, and all that. But I really didn't know how to connect. And like the spider that is my archetypal favorite figure, I'm doing that now. She's showing me how to get to all these groups. Parents, I'm super involved in school gardens. 2 friends of mine here, one very wealthy and one very determined, have started a group called Education Outside. And now, after some years, not that many, they have put a garden, the money to put a garden in, a garden, and a consultant full-time who teaches kids from the garden how to grow food, how to cook the food, why it's good for you, and all the principles of nature and science. And so I just think that's a huge development. 60% of San Francisco elementary schools have that program and have those gardens. So they give them a big chunk of money. They give them a trained young trained person to cook and grow the garden with them. And everything's happening from those gardens.
Nice.
So that's the kind of thing I'm looking for, alliances.
And just like you mentioning the lady who like helped with the music and stuff like that. Like, do you find that as you've gotten out there that these connections and collaborations just kind of come out of like just people are drawn to your work, or like how does that kind of happen in terms of like what kind of sparks these connections?
I think it's that kind of openness, because I was really shy as a kid. That's another reason reading was such a big part of my life. I looked younger than everybody. I was shy, but now I'm not so afraid of it all. So when I went to that school to perform, I mean, that was for me a big adventure. And with kids, I'm not afraid to perform. With adults, I am. But anyway, so Sarah came up to me, and then in tango, I met Lauren because we go to the same classes at the Mission Cultural Center. And I could just see she had this light in her eyes. She was really lovely and really smart and just starting something new. And when she called it Moonshot, I thought, that's how I feel. It's like a shot to the moon. It's a long shot, but I'll try it. So nice. I agree. Who are your colleagues?
Just different people, yeah, that I've connected with. Sometimes actually through, reaching out through, hey, would you be interested in being on this show? And then other times it's just through their own work. That's something with what they wrote, or maybe a video, stuff like that kind of resonated with me, and then I just reached out and just said, hey, would you be interested? And yeah, and see, that's the thing, you just never know sometimes with absolutely that, like, just be like you said, being open to kind of just this kind of certain energy, I guess, if you will, like as you mentioned, where something attracted you to Laura Lee and stuff, and and then likewise, Susan, I guess, found something in what she saw in you, so you never know, like, who kind of will reach out to who first and stuff, but just really being out there.
I trust collaboration much more. I am kind of a loner. My idea of a perfect day is stay in my pajamas till about 3 p.m. writing this novel, or sending out stories, or doing things at my computer. And it's actually amazingly fun to have allies in the world. So I have a recording studio where I love everybody, called Bird, which is a great recording studio in San Francisco. I called a Turkish friend the other day, because Litquake is a big deal here. And I'm a lot older than most of the people that do Litquake, but I said, listen, next year, let's go do something with the Arabian Nights and have stories and Turkish food and do it at a Turkish restaurant. She's a great Turkish writer. She's done a number of books on the harem. Her grandmother grew up in a harem, and she's really fun. So I thought, that's the kind of thing I never had the courage before. But all it takes is just reaching out. And if they say no, so what? But it's great.
It's also interesting how, like, that you were saying, and I'm that way too, where like I started off very introverted and very much like, to myself and stuff. But just through, what the work that you've done, and also just from a growth, again, that kind of thing where, like, that old self of you kind of you left behind to become this new self and stuff. I feel like that's, again, part of the process and stuff. And I that's interesting that, that's what evolved and stuff from the work that you did. Besides your grandmother, were there other folks that kind of like inspired you to kind of like to grow out of that? Like, were there people who kind of helped to nurture that growth?
I had very strict teachers in lower school. I went to only girls' schools. They called me by my mother's name. They forgot who I was. This place was so traditional. It was like crazy. But then I went away to college on the East Coast, and I just fell in love with everything, with the library that had open stacks, with my English teacher. I took about 3 classes from him, Milton, Paradise Lost, and Shakespeare. I had not ever immersed myself in anything before. I had, you covered all the subjects, but it wasn't like you passionately got into it, or the Fairy Queen. And I would just remember just being enraptured by learning. And so that was new for me. I'd been a good student, but I didn't really care. I just wanted to get a good grade so my parents would think I was good. But I wasn't in love with it. And in college, I had all this freedom to just take what I wanted, study when I wanted, do what I wanted, and just be crazy for it. So that was my first experience that I could really be passionate about something, aside from boys. I didn't think I was very cute at all. I looked about 12. Anyway, yeah, so falling in love with learning. And it's just like what you're saying. It's falling in love with making friends, falling in love with trying new things, and finally falling in love with your own work. Because I kept thinking, well, you're kind of, you're kind of weird. You like all these things that children like because you're scared of grown-ups, and you're just doing that because you can't make it in the big world. And I finally thought, I can't help it. That's who I am. I love things for kids, and I love things with kids.
Were there times though that like that were things along that lines of where even though you were passionate about it, that like you felt drawn to it, that like you kind of like you said, was there like different times you faced folks that kind of questioned it, or different times or did you find yourself questioning yourself, like kind of that like you kind of wondered, is this really what I'm like what I really want to do? Or
yeah,
what was it that and then like how did you like kind of how did you face those kind of challenges and like kind of those doubts? And
it was really hard because I kept thinking there was something wrong with me for sticking around kids when I could be with these grown-ups. But then I'd go to like a Squaw Valley Writers Conference, and I would have amazing teachers. One was Gary Snyder, and one was a Native American man who became a very good friend, Darrell Babe Wilson, who taught me the Native California stories. But aside from them, a lot of the writers were really depressed. They were depressed, and they were talking about suicidal relationships and bad marriages and divorce. And I thought, okay, I know about all that, but I really don't care about all that. It's not where I don't feel at home. But where I feel at home, I just walk into a room of kids. I'm so happy. Or being out of doors with children, or being in a garden with children. I did for years programs on the weekend at the Arboretum in Golden Gate Park. They had a really creative education director, and we could invite in, storytellers from different traditions, African and Asian, European, whatever. We could make headdresses and celebrate spring. I just kept thinking, I can't leave that world. I can step out farther than my safety zone, but I can't leave it. It's just where my heart is. It's where I'm happy. It's where I work.
So along the way, you had glimpses of, like kind of what you felt was really your element, and that kind of just kept you going. And did that were there certain times that like then you really felt like that this is it, like kind of like was it those times that you were, like you said, telling stories, that was that kind of what it was, that like when you were just telling stories with the kids and stuff? And
I think that, yeah, exactly. Those affirmation, those moments of total happiness, when you're in love with your material, the kids are receiving it, they're all excited, or the other part is being in the recording studio and hearing the recording and then mixing it with Sarah's music, or doing shows together. It's expensive to get the air travel to the West or the East, but with Sarah on stage, we've done like 500 kids, and it was just dazzling, because then you have the piano, her music, a keyboard, and I could move around and tell the story in a big spiral with a bunch. Now you be the opossum, and you'll be the buzzards, and you'll be the spider, and I guess I'll never grow up. I hope I won't.
That sounds great, though. I mean, I could definitely just picture that the kids are involved, and like kind of where like you're kind of like almost like an orchestra. I'm drawing a blank as to the
conductor.
The conductor,
Yeah,
and then you're just orchestrating this grand symphony of kids, and as part of the storytelling. That's a brilliant image. I mean, I
love that metaphor. That's great. I'll use that. Yeah, you feel that way. That you watch the conductor and think, oh, how can they do it? But it does happen. But it's all with the story. I must say, learning to write a novel. I'm so critical. I'm a Virgo, and I just go back and go, oh no, you have to say that better. So, but what you're pointing out is the big lesson. Take it as it comes. I chose to do it. I'm in love with the idea, and do it. It's going to be hard. It's all
And so it's interesting though, because you've done so much writing, for these children's stories, and yet it's still so different though to you. Like at least that's the way. Like it's funny because like certainly as an adult I understand that like a children's story is one thing and stuff, and a novel is another. But yet I guess like on a simplistic version, like to I guess a layman, like writing is writing, but yet like kind of so what is it like kind of are you finding like is the big other than or maybe that is it that like it is it the transition is for yourself in terms of how you see the work, or like what is it that's kind of making that transition such a divide though for you?
I think it's a kind of fear of depth and the dark, because when I tell a fairy tale, there's usually a very innocent person, a child or an animal, who has to master all these difficult situations. In a novel, you have to get right inside of someone and inside of her opponents and inside of her allies. And it's far more complex. And also you have to be completely open-minded and go into the dark, the unknown. You don't know what words are going to arise. You have to try to hear her voice and hear the right sounds. The descriptive parts are really fun because you can have a field day describing things. But I find it's a huge adventure to go deep into the soul. And everyone has their dark and light sides, and everyone has their strong and weak sides, and really make that person breathe life into her. And it's very different. One thing that's been helping me a lot is I just started a blog on my website. It's called Bees Buzz. And I've written, let's see, the first one was about Albert Einstein. It's a famous thing he said to a woman who asked him, how can I get my son to become a great scientist like you? And he said, read him fairy tales. She said, well, what else should I do? He said, read him more fairy tales. Because he believed that the active imagination, the courageous mind, would have adventures and be willing to go on adventures to find new truth. And so I thought of all the brilliant people who've ever lived, he's one of the top. And it was so marvelous what he said about fairy tales. The sense of justice, the sense of adventure, the sense of courage and facing fear. It all goes there. It all comes from that. But
yeah,
go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say it's interesting how people like associate him with scientific and logic and stuff, but he was such a huge fan of imagination and creativity. Like, there's so many quotes of him around, like the importance of that over, just the rational mind, and which, like there's something about the effective where we've made the master the slave. We've made the like our imagination the slave to, the rational mind, which is like kind of what he's saying is the opposite of what we should do and stuff.
All the discoveries come from the mind that's curious and open and can make leaps. It fascinates me. I have a niece who's a brilliant young biophysicist, brain scientist, and she's dealing with men and women who've been traumatized by war in Iraq. And she said the greatest healing for them comes through narrative, learning to tell their story. And so if you tell, I haven't tried this with grown-ups, but I think even for kids who have a hard life, really poor kids I see a lot of in the schools, if you tell them you can stand up against a bully, you can stand up against an ogre, but you have to stand up in your own way. Use your wits, don't use violence. But that's a huge healing of the brain. And Lily, my niece, Lily Bowles, she said it actually helps to heal the part of the brain that was traumatized. Because by telling the story, you release the pain and you reopen the courage. And so to me, I'm learning so much about the brain right now from her and from other people doing this research on the therapeutic value of narration and telling your own story. But the more you've had narratives told to you, the more you've read maybe, the more likely you are to be able to build a narrative. Like, what was your enemy? What in you is heroic? What harm was done to you? Like a rape victim, the same thing. They get frozen until they can tell the story. And shame, like the shame of a soldier to admit the pain, the shame of a rape victim, boy or girl, to admit the shame, the pain, that can be healed to some degree. So I want to keep following this research. I just find it fantastic that Einstein and our younger generation, they're brain scientists, they're putting this together. Really exciting. And of course, it validates storytelling in a way that I never imagined.
Yeah, it's fascinating how like we know so much about how our body works down to even like the cellular level, but yet the brain, we're just starting to scratch the surfaces of understanding of, you know, the intricacies and how, you know, and yeah, I've also heard the same thing where in fact, I've written a little bit about that, how the ways that storytelling happens, like when we engage the different senses, the brain literally will have reactions in the different parts of the brain as if we're actually experiencing it, and it's something that like doesn't happen with like other things, you know, like it only happens with storytelling. So it's really fascinating.
Narrative that includes shadow and light, struggle and success, victory and failure. It's the bigness of the story that opens up the channels that have been shut down. So you can't help but love it for all kinds of reasons. What are you writing?
Oh, I'm actually, you know, what's it called, other than writing like about creativity, about entrepreneurship, is, you know, I'm planning to join the NaNoWriMo, you know, for the month of November and stuff. So that's gonna be my big challenge. Awesome.
Me too. I'm gonna make myself finish my novel. I signed up for that.
Same here.
That's great. Well, when are you in San Francisco?
Oh, you know, that's the thing. I have to see about the next time I'm up there. But you know,
are you dancing at all? Are you dancing?
I am once in a while, yeah, down here in Southern California. It's just not the same though, and I guess that's one of the things that just as an aside to some of the folks in the audience and stuff. But B and I met through dancing tango. It's one of those things that we're both passionate about, and actually that's something that I've had people tell me though, is that like when I dance tango, it's like that I'm telling a story with my movements and stuff, and it's one of the things that like I find fascinating about that, like within a tanda, this is kind of within each song, even there's a story that kind of happens within each song. That's a classic tango thing that makes it unique to tango versus like other forms of dance, I feel.
It's really true. Songs have, the tango music has so much narrative in it.
Yeah.
We now host, Terry and I host an event at the De Young every year, and then one at the Legion, maybe not every year, but at the De Young for sure, and hundreds of people come. Yeah. Hundreds. You better come up for that.
That'd be awesome. In terms of, you know, one of the things we haven't talked yet about you know, we mentioned before the show and stuff like that, but you're now a voting member of the Grammys, and so yeah, can you tell a little bit about like kind of how that came about and like what now is like?
A good, you know, Kitty, the woman I mentioned, a very dear friend of mine, Kitty Margolis, is so great, a singer, and in my, you know, shy mode, I couldn't imagine anything like that. And she said, B, why don't you just apply? And how many CDs do you have? And I said, well, I have 5. And she said, are they digitized? Oh, yes, everything's this and that. And she said, well, go ahead. And I did. And I got in. And I thought, oh, it's a miracle. I don't deserve it. You know, I don't deserve it. Oh. And then I began listening to all the other kids' material. Some of it I love. Some of it is just pure genius. Some of it's so-so. It's not my taste because it's a little too clang, 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 and bang, bang, bang. But it's all there. So much talent. So much creativity. And so now being part of Grammy advocacy, part of Grammy Pro, I'm finding more and more people. And as time goes on, Terry and I talk about this a lot. The people that are fun to be around, that are energizing, are creative people. Yeah. And the ones who are just into the money or the Ferraris or whatever they have, it's no fun. And I believe that's the line of life that we follow. You know, go where the energy is. For me, the energy is in kids, it's in nature, it's in creative people. But a lot of grown-ups are not very much fun.
Yeah, I'm definitely all about, like, you know, buying experiences, not about buying stuff, because, you know, there's plenty of stuff, and stuff will come and go and everything, but like you can't, like that's the only thing that really stays with us is the experiences, you know, like these things that we remember, that like we, you know, like kind of the moment that we spent with someone, the conversation that we had, or like a dinner, and I mean those are things that like will stay with you for the rest of your life and stuff. So
the friendships and the walks in nature and those nights of just happiness.
With all the things you've accomplished and everything, so what do you feel has like kind of been your proudest moment so far, though? Like that you really feel like has been
my kids and my grandkids. I mean, all the other stuff I love, but my daughter has 2 unbelievable cafes in San Francisco that I can't even get into. because they're so popular. And my son runs our ranch, which is a huge job.
Nice.
And he's taken over from my brother, and he's fluent in Spanish. He's a leader of his community. He speaks for all the farm workers. He's spoken in front of the Senate. He's just a really heroic person, too. So despite everything else, they make me the happiest. But my work was a way of letting them grow up, because if I had something of my own, I wouldn't cling on to them too much. But I do cling on to them. Anyway, and I have 5 grandchildren who are fantastic. Knock on wood. They just seem to me really cool and really loving and really smart. So I'm very lucky.
Well, thank you, V. Really appreciate your time and sharing your journey and stuff like that. Where are places that you would like to share that for folks to learn more about you and what you do, and and what's next for your journey?
Fantastic. Go to my website, www.beatricebowles.com. I have a new post up about the origins of Halloween, and there are things you never knew. Where did this holiday come from, and why is it so wild, and how have people tried to kind of tame it down for kids? And it's really fun. I find that writing the blogs is a riot. And the third one I'm about to put up is about spiders, why so many cultures teach about spiders as teachers of wisdom because of their strategic ways. They're tiny, the way children are, but they're smart, and they build these webs, and they know how to survive for 400 million years. They've known how to survive, so I don't know. You go to my site. That's the best place. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, on Instagram. Definitely see you. Humanity rocks on.
Awesome, V. Thanks again for your time, and it's been my pleasure to have you on the show and stuff like that. And definitely, we look forward to hearing what's next in your journey and stuff. And we'll catch everyone who's watching next time on another Creative Entrepreneurs